All right, everyone. Welcome to TradeView Live. I am your co-host, Ben Tracy. I lead strategic business development at Vizion. Joined here by my fellow host, CEO Kyle, and we have a guest. It's not just Kyle and I today. We wanted to mix things up, and especially with everything going on in the world, bringing in different perspectives and subject matter experts. So very glad that Fabio from Xeneta could join us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Fabio, why don't you just introduce your role at Xeneta and briefly, what does Xeneta do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Fabio. Currently, I'm the Chief Product Officer at Xeneta. And at Xeneta, we are a market intelligence platform. So we provide data and insights to shipper, carriers, and forwarders on how to navigate volatility. So we have tons of data around rates, both short-term market and long-term market, but most recently also schedules and vessel positioning. So I've been with Xeneta for a couple of years, and I come from the industry. So I worked for MSC for almost a decade, and then for Amazon for 5 years.
Wonderful. Well, we're really glad to have you. I'm sure it's been similar for you all in the last 12 to 18 months in terms of volatility, like you were saying. But even just in the last 2 weeks, there's a lot to go through, a lot that you all observing in your platform, a lot that we're seeing in our booking trends. So Kyle, why don't we take it from here? And before we do so, we might have some new guests that have joined. Let's go through our traditional disclaimers. TradeView, what is that? What are we here to talk about?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So TradeView, which is our product offering that this live session is named after, is a industry-leading trade intelligence platform. We see 57% of all the global containerized freight shipments, 3 times more than any other platform, and we see this at the lowest level of detail. Profiled 1.5 million companies, provide 90-day trade forecasts for all of that, forecasts being highly valued by our customer base. And this also allows you to do things such as mapping the supplier and product networks. There's AI researchers built into it, et cetera. But most of the insights we provide in these TradeView live sessions come directly from using this platform, and often we'll even end up screen sharing the platform to answer questions that you, the viewers, submit as comments live. So don't hold back. Ask your questions.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought up data. There's a lot of data we're going to go through in the next 27 minutes. But at least briefly, where does the data come from specifically in the TradeView platform?
So TradeView has more than 270 different proprietary data connections, ocean carriers, booking platforms, AIS, direct connections to ports and terminals, different customs agencies, et cetera. And all of that information is brought into, well, one, provides you insights on a day-by-day basis going back 12 years. We sit on 1.5 billion shipment histories. But I think what you're going to prompt me to next is, how can you forecast the future with this data?
Yes, leading indicators, not just a review of what has happened, but what does it indicate about what is to come in the world of global shipping?
And one of the key data sets behind TradeView is ocean bookings. So we receive about more than 40% of all the ocean bookings made worldwide every single day. And that allows us to see what is planned to ship, what is currently in motion, and what has arrived. And that allows us to generate great slides like this, telling you about what's happening in the world of booking containerized ocean freight.
Wonderful. So we last got together a few weeks ago in the midst of all these different trade shows, from Manifest, looking at all sorts of supply chain innovations, and just where we were last week, TPM, which is all about getting the largest shippers in the world to kind of lock in their rates, their volume commitments for the year with large ocean carriers. We were entering the year with a lot that had changed in 2025, but specifically seeing U.S. imports and China to U.S. imports down significantly, especially with China to U.S. But what's happened in the last few weeks? It looks like we've seen even global shipping activity start to drop a bit.
Yeah, it's been shifting around. It's been responding, of course, to what's been happening in the Middle East. But there's some other insights here, for China-U.S. bookings, and enjoy your mooncakes, because Lunar New Year has come and gone, but you can certainly see the amazingly large trough that happens on a week by week or year by year basis for Chinese New Year, which was that February 16th, February 23rd weeks of impact. And that's why you get those big red boxes there. But you also see that playing out in terms of bookings to U.S. import, because China is such still a major source of goods coming to the U.S. So that February 16th, you also see those similar drops. And of course, global bookings to China is a source for almost everywhere in the world. And so that February 16th, again, for the week over week and year over year changes is pretty noticeable in the heat maps.
Well, what's interesting here is China to US after the Lunar New Year has ended, you see that huge week over week increase.
Mm-hmm.
But in comparison to the year before is still close to what we were seeing last year, 15 to 25% less than what we would normally see at this time of year for China to US bookings.
Yeah, and because it's Lunar New Year, there's context here. So this is just 1 year over year view, but you kind of typically need to look at it on like a 7-year view, because the Lunar New Year shifts its week. And typically, I believe it's a cycle of 7. Please correct me if I'm wrong, comments at large. But that year over year will have a clear effect in terms of that Lunar New Year impact. But when you really kind of understand it, you need to be looking at it a longer timeline, which we have access to and can follow up with anyone who's interested in that.
And Fabio, I just want to give you a chance to jump in here. Especially when we look at that China to US, global bookings is relatively stable, especially if we go back farther than even the last 8 weeks, like we're looking at here. But China to US, are you seeing something similar from your customers, the way that they've responded to what's happened in the last 12 months for China to US shipping trends?
Yeah, and for us, it's also around rates, right?
Yeah.
And so we were all going at TPM last week with the buyer's market, where rates were going down, shippers could see extra capacity in the market. Now the tables have turned. Yeah. So it's been an interesting last 10 days, and we're going to talk about it. But I think there's going to be a bigger impact of this Middle East war also on other regions, and this is going to be one where we are keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, and on that other regions, one of the things we probably should start adding to this slide is China to Europe.
Yeah.
Because that was a major strategy change, both in terms of suppliers and buyers, but also for the ocean carriers. Certainly the Gemini Alliance was anchoring hard to a return. CMA was anchoring hard to a return, pulled back, but it'll be interesting. This affects everyone. And it's interesting. Almost every global choke point right now is being affected in some meaningful way, whether it's Suez, Hormuz, Panama Canal. The only one that's looking pretty good right now is Singapore.
Yep. So let's look at just a deeper dive into bookings next. I posted on LinkedIn about this, early this week, how we saw, to no one's surprise, bookings going into or going out of these Arabian Gulf ports. And Arabian Gulf would include both west of the Strait of Hormuz or inside, as well as just outside the strait. We have carriers that have said they're really not accepting any bookings, or if they are, they're going to come with a lot of surcharges. And so, to no one's surprise, the bookings have dropped quite a bit, but haven't ceased entirely. That was maybe one thing I wanted to point out in this chart. Obviously, we see just a dramatic decrease. It was 81%. I think it's now past that. We're seeing decreases of almost 90%, but there are still some bookings coming through. And so shippers, whether it's based on the type of cargo they need to ship or the rate that they're willing to pay, are still able to get some bookings accepted by carriers. Fabio, any comments on that? I guess, do you still see why we would still see even some bookings being placed? Maybe it's a booking for a month from now, right? It's not scheduled to sail quite yet, but
it's super interesting because what we see is carriers, they immediately react vessel by vessel. So they try to fix the position of what's out there at the moment. And then only once that is settled and somewhat stable, then we're going to look at rotations and schedule changes. So as of now, we were checking this morning, they've been announcing a lot of vessel changes, but the schedule has not changed yet.
Oh, wow.
There are about 230 vessels that are on schedule for Jebel Ali over the next 90 days.
Yeah.
So for each of them is a question mark. Like, is it actually happening? And similar topic is with rates, right? There are surcharge announcement and rates announcement, but if bookings are not happening, then is somewhat not a factor.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very situation changing every single day, and still very hard to know what the schedule is going to look like next week or 2 weeks from now.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be interesting even 2 weeks from now to look at what of these bookings that were placed have actually sailed, right? Whether they're going out of the Arabian Gulf ports or they're coming from some other origin overseas, coming in to the Arabian Gulf ports. So looking at those departures downstream from the bookings being placed.
Yeah, and we can seem to see, bookings to the Arabian Gulf ports. It really did drop to zero the 7th and 8th of March.
And I think that when this unfortunate war began, and we've had loss of lives on all sides involved. Sailors are obviously impacted. It's a terrible loss of life, and everyone's sort of trying to stay safe. At the same time, it's a question of how long is this going to last, right? Is this a situation that can blow over in 7 to 10 days, which is what a lot of the headlines were sort of insinuating. And now, from what I've read in the last 24, 48 hours, this might be a prolonged conflict. This could very easily stretch into months, if not more. And that might be what we now see is, like Fabio, what you were saying, those immediate reactions can now start to become permanent changes in the way bookings are placed, the surcharges, and then eventually the actual vessel schedule.
And Fabio, to your point a moment ago, where it's you need to look at this on a vessel by vessel level. From what we have in terms of our booking information, we can forecast typically with great accuracy about what's going to be arriving at certain ports into the future. But right now, pretty much everything that's on this slide in terms of TEU volumes headed to the Arabian Gulf ports, I don't think anyone should expect any of this to be actually delivered right now. It's all going to get dumped somewhere. We're hunting down where it's likely to going to get dumped, but we're looking at this at a container by container level right now. But to your point, like, what are you guys hearing in terms of where vessels are actually making their calls? I've heard things about Colombo and Singapore trying to get it to relatively, strong transshipment locations. But what are you guys seeing in terms of the vessel insights?
Yeah, I'll have a few comments later, but we see India as a big place where containers have been discharged. There are also different offerings being announced. So I am aware of MSC and CMA kind of pushing inland services into the region. So they would discharge in different ports like Turkey or Jeddah, and then move the cargo via inland. So it's still very much happening, and not every carrier has the same reaction. But I think many of them are still trying to figure this out.
And trying to figure this out, we were talking about surcharges a moment ago. What's becoming kind of interesting is how essentially the bunker fuel costs and the surcharges have also been popping up. I think you made a good point about, well, what if these charges are actually going to get collected? But it's been interesting to see that, at least from the fuel surcharge increases compared to the actual market price, it looks like the carriers are actually trying to absorb a decent amount of the additional cost, and it's not really getting passed through by astronomical surcharges. This analysis we shared yesterday out on LinkedIn is talk about how this correlation between bunker fuel market and surcharges is not as correlated as it typically is in many situations.
And I think I was also hearing Lars Jensen comment on the Supply Chain Secrets podcast hosted by NYSEX earlier this week about these bunker surcharges, these fuel surcharges now being applied globally. That historically the carriers have applied them to specific routes or trade lanes, where there are those regional impacts. This is now global, and maybe because of the fact that the surcharge was applied globally, it's not as severe. I could very well see this increasing, though, if the strait continues to remain closed.
We are running some roundtables with our community of shippers, and what we hear is that carriers are announcing a lot of those surcharges with very different levels. We have seen surcharges going from $800 to $5,000.
Wow.
And the problem around bunker is that many times carriers are not sharing their methodology with the shippers. So the starting point is unknown, and it's very hard for our shippers to accept a bunker surcharge, especially if the region is not involved in the conflict.
Right.
And then the last thing is, keep in mind, everything is negotiable. So we see a lot of shipper pushing back on some of those surcharges, and we see this is a time where I think it's important to see what's the partnership model like. Are carriers trying to apply all these surcharges, and regardless of contracts, are carriers working with the shippers? I think this is a time where if carriers are going to stay close to the shipper, then they're going to be rewarded when tender season comes and volumes are allocated.
It's a very good point. So there's a difference between what the carriers announce and maybe what they're quoting versus what, if a shipper can create that leverage and create that sort of partnership, what they actually get in their true rates.
Yeah. And just a bit of a range from what we were seeing, MSD announcing their kind of implementation of $60 to $230 per TEU, CMA $60 to $190, Maersk is standard BAF update type of thing. But it's been interesting to see like who's responding to like immediate risk transfer versus contract stability. Just throwing this up here real quick. You can get the full slide deck on LinkedIn underneath my profile or Vizion's profile if you want to take a look. And as we all know, fuel prices are jumping like crazy.
Highest jump in 40 years, right, in a single day. This graph really illustrates it. And there's more to come, I think, over the next 2 weeks. It's obviously an immediate response. Everyone's trying to protect themselves in the short term. The question is, what does that need to look like long term?
Yeah, and it's no surprise, but in terms of products being affected from not being able to get out of the region, it's predominantly plastic and petrochemicals of some sort. And this, again, is all containerized freight. But you also have some metals, some other energy products, industry machinery, a little bit of agriculture, et cetera. But predominantly the plastics and petrochemicals product chapter for HS codes is the major goods coming out of this area typically.
Right.
And this also shouldn't be a surprise, but Strait of Hormuz vessel entry year-over-year comparison. So looking at March this year compared to March last year, going in or out respectively, it's fell down to a very, very small volume. And this is from a containerized freight vessel perspective, not tankers or break bulk, et cetera.
Not to mention that even some of the vessels that are able to transit are doing so now with AIS turned off.
Yeah.
So even being able to determine that it's transited the strait is a little bit tricky with data feeds today.
And on the land side, to some extent, we're seeing, Jebel Ali, a major transshipment port, performance on the land side is severely being impacted. We went from 7.1 days from vessel arrival to typically having your container out to 12.1 days right now. And so the congestion and volume at Jebel Ali is growing, and it's growing meaningfully.
Wow. Yeah. 7 to 12 days. Yeah. And many of the nearby ports, even in the broader region, all the way to India and Singapore, I think are going to start to see this congestion. And just note that Vizion's able to measure, export port performance and any backlogs there, as well as transshipment. So when those ports are specifically used as a transshipment, and then of course import if that port is the final destination for the goods.
And I also want to call it's congestion on the vessel side, and it's also congestion on the yard side. So berth going 3.4, arrival to berth from 1.2, but also on the land dwell side, 7.8, where it was 5.4. So it's more vessels arriving, more containers are being dumped. Luckily, they're working the vessels about as quickly as they normally can. And so berth to departure, looking at 0.6 to 0.7.
Makes sense.
Fabio, thank you for providing all this great additional content. You're now the lead.
Thanks. And I just wanted to set the context before I go talk about rates and services, right? And I think I was hearing today Maersk CEO saying we are in uncharted territory. and making a direct comparison with COVID. So if we look at where we are today, the war started on the 28th of February, and by the 1st of March, the Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed. So in the following 72 hours, we have seen Iran struck Jebel Ali port in Dubai, targeted vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. And the situation today is that there are 147 container vessels ranging from 300 TEUs to 9,000 TEU that are stuck in the Gulf. It's roughly because, like you said, the AIS signals, the satellite is often turned off, so it's very hard to even get an accurate count. There's usually about 2 million TEUs a month that made its way through the Middle East. And of course, when insurance provider, they pull the insurance, that means that cargo is uninsured and no carriers will sail through. This is on top of what we're seeing with the Red Sea crisis, where over 1 million of TEU was already transiting through the Cape of Good Hope, adding about 2 weeks of transit time. And this, of course, this time there's a big impact on the air market as well, as the main hub in Doha and Dubai are closed. This means that two of the largest airlines in the world, Emirates and Qatar, they are not operating in the region. This creates massive bottlenecks, and we have seen rates skyrocketing. So we have seen rates up 35% in the following 2-3 days. But I'm hearing today some customer talking about Bangladesh to Europe rates tripling today. So it's a massive disruption. It's still ongoing. And this morning we have the news of a Hapag-Lloyd vessel that was hit in the Persian Gulf, as well as many tanker vessels.
Wow.
The situation is very much evolving, but I want to go to the next slide. And I want to zoom in a bit on port congestion. And we have what we have done, we have released some of our data for free to help shippers navigate in this transition. So we have a port congestion map you can find at the link that you see on the page. And every dot represents a port, and the color tells us the share of congestion, how congested is the port. And you can see that, the schedules are still very much changing every day. We have seen the Gemini services discontinuing 2 services, the FM1 and the ME11, removing about 26,000 TEU of capacity that was recently starting to transit through the Red Suez. And regional carriers' plans are also very uncertain. So as we mentioned earlier, as rotations are rewritten, what we see is carriers taking care of individual vessels first, and then thinking about how to reschedule and reshuffle rotations. In the port congestion map, what we see is that the Persian ports are effectively not operating, but we have seen congestion spiking in all the neighboring countries. So we have Navasheva congestion going from 10% to over 63% on March 2nd, March 3rd, and currently sitting at 53%. So just to give you an idea, there are 20 ships in the port, and there are 60 ships that are waiting to get to the port. Mm-hmm. And that's not only contained to the region. If you look at Mumbai, Karachi, all these ports, they are congested at the moment. And those are the alternative discharge port. So those are the ones that carriers are going to look at to dump some containers to move them into the region. Even the ports where in all these other ports, there are significant delays. So roughly what we see is 1 of 4 arrivals in the region is late over 7 days. And then we mentioned it briefly earlier, but Singapore. Singapore is what we call a canary in the coal mine. Right? It's a good signal. And Singapore has been running at over 40% congestion since the conflict began. Singapore is important because it's not only a regional hub, but it's one of the most important transshipment hubs in the world. So issues in that region, it means that we're going to see effects on many other different trade lanes. And we are not just dealing with a local regional conflict, but this is something that is going to impact all trade lanes. And I want to give you an example in the next slide.
Yeah.
Here is an example of the Damietta Express. This is a Hapag-Lloyd vessel, and you can see how the situation keeps changing, right? On the February 28th, the vessel was trying to go toward the port of Salalah, and all of a sudden it turns around, it waits outside of the port, and then on March 2nd, it makes a U-turn, it goes back trying to get and reach in the port. But that's the time where the port of Salalah was struck with two drones attack. There were no casualty, but all of a sudden there was a change of plan. So finally on March 4, they decide to add an additional call in Navasheva before the vessel makes it to Singapore. So the situation is very much vessel by vessel, like you said, and I think having visibility at vessel level to understand what's happening to my cargo, I think that is utmost important.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about trade. Let me go to the rates real quick. So if you go to the next one, we mentioned we were looking at the buyer's market with many of our customers in tender season, ready to sign contracts. And now this is turned upside down. So the spot rates increase very rapidly after the conflict starts. But we see indication where Navasheva is up 50% over the past 2 weeks. Colombo is up 35%. And even ports far away, like Hamburg, all the way in Europe, is up 5% because of this. And note also that this is market average that I'm showing you. So there are many shippers that are paying much more than this. And usually the spread widens when we see this type of crisis. What does it mean globally? We were forecasting a 25% decrease in freight rates globally in the spot market. Now this seems more reduced. So we're looking at 10% to 15%. And obviously a return to the Red Sea is off the table. So what it means is that there are many responses from different carriers. We have seen MSC announcing end of voyage, which practically means they can discharge your containers wherever they want. And that's going to be your cost to move it back. Maersk is offering additional surcharges to handle, frustrated customers and distressed cargo. And then we have seen many carriers pushing inland services as a replacement to ocean transportation. So this situation will take time. We heard from carrier CEO that even in a case of a ceasefire, this is going to take weeks before a return to operational normalcy. So how do you plan? If you go to the next slide, and I'll close here quick. Those are some suggestions that we provide to our customers, right? But the underlying theme is build some resilience into your contract. So if you haven't thought about index-linked contract, this is a good moment to start to see how this would have played out for you. So we encourage you to come and play with the simulator and try to understand a bit more. How can you build some of these resilience into your contract? But then also make sure that you have the right data and intelligence at your fingerprints. So whether it's Vizion or Xeneta, you want to have access to real-time data to be able to manage this disruption and to be proactive in making your decisions and reaching out to your suppliers.
And this makes a lot of sense. Thank you for both the zoomed out view as well as that zoomed in view of that individual vessel. Yeah, we really appreciate you sharing the data. One kind of last question is just practically speaking, we have shippers that attend this webinar, that listen to this. It looks like on that last slide you had some advice, but let's say I'm a shipper. I don't move goods into or out of this region. Let's say I'm a trans-Pacific shipper moving goods from Asia to the U.S. U.S. West Coast. What would you suggest if carriers are offering long-term contracts, offering to lock in rates? Should the shipper take advantage? Do you think rates could go up, or is it a wait and see? Wait 2 to 4 weeks and potentially things look better for the shipper.
I think this is not a regional problem. So you're going to be affected even outside of the region. And what we see most of our customers doing now is pressing pause on their tenders. So they pushed starting contract date, they push negotiation. That said, it's really up to you and your risk profile and the rates that you're getting from your carrier. But keep in mind that whatever you negotiate now, you're going to have an illusion that that's going to be a 12-month rate. That is very unlikely to happen. So you're going to be renegotiating, or you're going to be applied some sort of surcharges.
Makes sense.
Well, Fabio, Ben, thanks for joining me today on TradeView Live. And Fabio, thank you and your team for producing this set of wonderful slides. If there's any additional information you want to learn about Xeneta or Vizion or TradeView, you can follow up with us. Hit us on LinkedIn. We also have our contact information available on both of our websites. But thank you all for attending, and we look forward to all your follow-up questions, which there's usually a wave following each of these sessions. So thank you for those in advance.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.